So Trump and Putin just met in Alaska for nearly 3 hours, and yesterday Trump met with Zelensky in the Oval Office. And the result with Putin so far is there's no ceasefire, there's no peace deal, there's no real breakthrough. But the issue on the table remains the same. And it's enormous, right? Putin is demanding that Ukraine surrender nearly 1/5 of its territory and abandon NATO. So tonight I'm going to break down exactly what happened, why these lands matter so much to Russia, what annexation really means, and how all of this ties directly into your grocery bill, your gas tank, and especially your wallet. So at the end of the meeting, both leaders called the Alaska meeting productive, but there was no agreement. Trump pushed for Ukraine to move directly into a peace deal, skipping the idea of a temporary ceasefire. He was saying in an interview that all the wars that he stopped, they skipped all the ceasefires, right? Like he was saying that yesterday with the meeting with Zelensky, and they just go into a peace deal, which is not true because the one that they helped with Israel, they went into a ceasefire, which you all know how that went down. So Putin repeated the same conditions he has since 2022, that Ukraine must cede all Russian occupied territories, drop its NATO membership ambitions, and accept Russia's annexation. So what does Russia currently control right now? Russia right now controls about 19% of Ukraine. That's all of Crimea since 2014, nearly all of Luhansk, about 70% of Donetsk, and part of Zaporizhzhia and Kherson. In total, that's a little under 71,000 miles in territory, and Putin's goal is to turn them into permanent borders, something Ukraine will never accept. And within the meetings, that's something that Trump is pushing Ukraine to do, as well as to give up its territories. Now, each region carries weight, right? So you have to understand that Crimea is home of Russia's Black Sea Fleet at Sevastopol. So whoever holds Crimea controls naval routes and shipping lanes into the Black Sea and Mediterranean. So yes, Russia already has it, but Putin wants the world to legitimize that control so it can never be challenged. Donetsk and Luhansk, that's in the Donbass region, historically Ukraine's industrial base, basically holds a lot of coal, steel, machine factories, rail lines run through it, and Ukraine has already diversified its economy, but these resources are still valuable, right? So like Russia can absorb them into its own supply chains and typically really deny Ukraine that industrial strength if needed. So Zaporizhzhia and Kherson, these regions are about farmland and energy. Ukraine is one of the largest exporters of wheat, corn, and sunflower oil, and Zaporizhzhia also holds Europe's largest nuclear power plant. And Kherson, that secures the land bridge into Crimea. Even though Ukraine's seaborne exports are limited today, Russia uses that control over ports and shipping routes to weaponize food. And what does annexation mean? So it basically means declaring foreign land as your own. So Russia annexed Crimea in 2014 and 2022, and it announced annexations of Luhansk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhzhia and Kherson, and even though some of those weren't really fully controlled under Russia. So almost no country recognizes these annexations, but Putin insists that Ukraine must as a part of any peace deal because they really want these lands, right? And I want to break down real quick, why does Russia keep pushing for these lands? Like, you think Russia's already big enough. So first, it's strategic, right? Like, you got to think about it. Russia doesn't want NATO right on their doorstep. So controlling the eastern and southern Ukraine territories creates space between NATO territories and Russia core regions, especially Moscow. And second, it's an economic leverage. So all of these areas hold coal, steel, farmland, nuclear energy, and ports. So absorbing them and having them in its own supply boosts Russia's economy, and it can kind of weaken Ukraine's ability to recover if needed. Second, it makes sense economically, right? Like, these areas hold coal, steel, farmland, nuclear energy, and ports, so it's beneficial for Russia to have them in its own way. And third, at the end of the day, it's political symbolism. Like, Putin wants to prove that force can redraw borders and that Russia can restore what is seen as historic lands. He doesn't use that exact phrase, but his speeches and annexation ceremonies all point to this message. Like, it's clear as point. Now let's talk about oil and gas, because this is where many people wonder, does the US get Russian oil anymore? And the answer is no. The US banned Russian energy imports in 2022, and before that, Russia was a small share of the US supply, which was around 8%. And today, most of the oil and gas comes from the US itself, Canada, Mexico, and obviously other partners. But here's a key point. Oil is a global market. prices are set on a benchmark like Brent and WTI. And even though we don't buy Russian oil, if the global market shifts because of war, sanctions, and peace talks, then we can feel it at the gas pumps. Now, if peace seems possible, traders expect more supply and less risks, so that's when the prices dip. If there's talks about collapse, then expect tighter supply and higher risk, and that's when you see the prices move. Even if we don't import a single Russian barrel, it's because of that. Now, who depends on Russia? While the US doesn't buy Russian oil, other countries still rely heavy on it. So Europe cut most of its pipeline imports, but still gets Russian oil through back channels and LNG swaps. India and China have become the biggest buyers, purchasing Russian oil at a discount and reselling some of it on the global markets. And many developing countries still rely on Russian diesel, fertilizer, and natural gas supplies. That's why what happens in Ukraine affects everyone's prices, because Russian energy still flows just through different routes. Now, if Russia cements its territorial control, here's what to expect. Now, food prices could rise worldwide if Ukraine loses farmlands and its ports permanently. Energy markets may stay volatile, short-term dips if peace feels close, but long-term spikes if Russia uses its stronger position to cut supply. Inflation risk remains highly global because both food and energy are base costs for literally everything else. And the real question is, what does this mean for you? So for everyday people in the US, this translates into higher grocery bills, unstable gas prices, and more inflation pressure that trickles down into rent, travel, and shipping costs. It's not about whether we buy Russian oil directly, it's about how their war shapes the entire global market that we're all tied into. Now, here's something that I always suggest that people do. Buy non-perishable items in bulk that you already use before prices climb. Take advantage of gas dips, fill up your tanks, hold off on big travel and energy purchases until, prices kind of stabilize. And besides that, there's not really much that you can do. Like, I don't want to sit here and say that things are going to get worse as far as inflation, as far as prices. Like, obviously we're working towards lowering inflation, lowering rates, and all these different markers that will affect you in your everyday life. But there's little things that you can do in your everyday life that can be beneficial, or having stocks of things that you already use in your everyday life, having extra food, water. That's just some necessities that you want to have regardless of how the market is. So remember, market reacts before headlines. So by the time CNN says gas prices are spiking, the market already moved days earlier. So you want to stay ahead of the game, and you want to keep these things again in your back stock. Now, I hope that kind of explained what's going on right now in some of the world politics and things that are happening with Russia, Ukraine, and outside of our country, and how it's going to affect your wallet. So I definitely want to tie all this back together, because it's something that we should all be looking at. And if this is a video that you like, definitely subscribe, hit the like button, hit the bell notification. Definitely helps out a small channel like myself. And until next time, love you guys all. Peace.